Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to the first webinar of 2026 inside the UAE SAF Producer Playbook, where our panel will be exploring what it really takes to get SAF projects off the ground. My name's Roz, I'm the Content Director for the SAF MENA Congress. Sustainable Aviation Futures hosts a global series of high-level SAF and aviation decarbonisation conferences, bringing together the entire value chain to network, connect, and discuss the capabilities for scaling innovative energy solutions and powering a thriving aviation industry. Over the next 60 minutes, our panel of experts will discuss the viable feedstocks for announced projects and future production, what makes the UAE the perfect melting pot to scale SAF, how producers are structuring offtake and identifying buyers, and the financing models that have brought success. The webinar is being hosted ahead of the Sustainable Aviation Futures MENA Congress, which is taking place in Dubai, February 10th to the 12th, so just 2 weeks away. Today, we'll provide a snapshot into some of the topics covered at the event, which will also include all of our speakers today. The 3-day event features over 400 global leaders from across aviation, energy, finance, and government to accelerate progress towards aviation decarbonisation. Over 3 days, discussions will span sustainable aviation fuel, eSAF, power to liquids, LCAF, hydrogen, airport operations and infrastructure, global trade, policy alignment, and corporate sustainability. So a lot to cover there. The event aims to connect decision makers and shaping both the regional and global transition to cleaner skies. If you'd like to keep abreast of all of our upcoming events, as well as gain access to exclusive interviews and articles, be sure to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, SAF Spotlight, which is going out today, the first edition of 2026. Finally, before I hand over to today's moderator, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. The session is being recorded and will be distributed to you once the webinar finishes. So if you have to leave for any reason, you won't miss out. But I suggest staying because there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so you can ask any questions you have in that box and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can. With that, I'm pleased to hand over to today's brilliant moderator, Ranil Dalia, Principal Analyst at Lux Research. Ranil, take it away.
Thank you very much, Ross, and hello to everyone on the panel as well as people on the call. So we're very happy to be here today to be discussing the UAE and really how to make the UAE a key SAF hub area in the world. So I'm your moderator today. My name is Ronald Dalia from Lux Research. Lux is an advisory firm that works with large corporations, oil and gas, chemicals, airline, in identifying emerging technologies, including sustainable aviation fuel. But today is not really about me, but rather with our 3 esteemed experts here, Robert Wright, Yusuf Said Luta, and Alejandro Rios Galvan. And today we are here to discuss how to make the UAE a key SAF hub, and I will ask each of the panelists to please start with a brief introduction about yourself and your experience in this space. So perhaps, Yusuf, we can start with you.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon for everyone here. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Yusuf bin Saeed Luta, Chairman and CEO of Luta Biofuels. Luta Biofuels considers the first biofuel company in the UAE. We are proud of that. The journey, to start the biofuels 15 years ago or 16 years ago, back in 2010, and to see the changes, especially the regulations from the government, how to advocate the biofuels. And recently, we were participating in Dubai Air Show. We have launched the sustainable aviation fuel. We are a waste used cooking oil also collector. So from raw material to refining, the product until distributing the biofuels to the country in the UAE. So SAF is the future. We believe in that. That's why we have launched the sustainable aviation fuel back in Dubai Air Show. We will talk about the challenges and the opportunity, of course. So this is just a small brief about myself.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Alejandro, you're next.
Thank you, Runil. My name is Alejandro Rios. I am currently an independent consultant. Prior to this, I was the director of the Sustainable Bioenergy Research Consortium at Khalifa University of Science and Technology. And before that, I was the director of the National Jet Fuel Network for Mexico, my home country, where I was in charge of all of the interplane and storage of jet fuel for the entire country. Thank you.
Robert, you're next.
Yeah, hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Robert Wright. I'm the founder and managing partner of Platform Sustainability. Basically, we provide advisory services in the area of clean energy investments and government policy, public policy regulation. I have a long background in this area, 25 years working in Brussels for the European Commission, and also CEO of the European biofuels sector. So, very interested in being in Dubai for the last 2 years, very interested in exchanging, knowledge and advice on how the European biofuels and SAFs policy framework has gone, and how it inputs in potentially to the UAE SAFs roadmap. So I'm an expert in clean energy sustainability and SAFs and biofuels.
Great. Thank you very much, Robert, Yusuf, and Alejandro. So let's get started with the discussion then. So for today, over the next 45 minutes to an hour, we'll be discussing the UAE, looking at the position of the UAE in the SAF global landscape. We'll be discussing policy, technologies, as well as investments. And as Ross mentioned earlier, if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get to your questions if we can. But perhaps to start, looking at SAF, I think there's no denying out there that when it comes to the market for SAF, it's really driven by policy. Without policy, you don't really have a market for SAF. And when you look at the global policy landscape today, the EU is the most advanced. They have the SAF mandate that was rolled out last year, and we had the first full year of the mandate, the EU and the UK. And this is where we'd like to turn to you, Robert, because you have experience both in the EU and in Dubai, in the Middle East. And based on your experience, do you believe that a mandate is the only way to create demand for SAF? And should the UAE also have a mandate, a legally binding mandate, in order to build up the demand for SAF in the country?
Thanks, Ranil. I think what you've said there is very correct in terms of, the role of public policy in driving these markets and driving SAFs. Without going into too much of the history on this, but anywhere you look, whether it's renewable energy in terms of PV solar or wind farms and biofuels, and now SAFs for aviation, public policy really plays a key role, fundamental role. There's no way in which investors and producers and actors in an ecosystem can get started in a market unless they're sure what the policy framework will be. The policy framework should be supportive from the outset, and it should remain consistent and certain. What you've seen in the EU, for example, are a number of very ambitious policies, but which then have been U-turned because they're poorly implemented. So the UAE is at a unique and very important period in terms of how to get this policy mix right to promote SAFs in the UAE based on the SAFs actual roadmap. With regard to the question of is an obligatory mandate the only policy instrument? No, I don't think it is. It's one of them. I think sometimes there's a tendency to look a little bit too much about what the EU is doing in this space. So clearly, the refuel re-aviation package in the EU for aviation is focused on a binding mandate. But what we can see so far in the first year or two, coming to the second year now, is that the binding mandate has not actually spurred this market. So based on experience, we see that obligatory binding mandates are not on their own a nirvana, a necessarily only supporting policy instrument. The question emerges for the UAE whether or not there should be a binding mandate. At the moment, it's a voluntary 1% mandate. So some discussions around that I think will happen. But I think they have to happen in the context of how SAFs can be supported by an integrated mix of policy instruments, not just mandates. So, for example, fiscal instruments, exchanges of policies whereby all of the actors inside the SAF's ecosystem and value chain can speak with government and identify the right policy mix. Policy is usually a carrot or a stick. It can be both. I think a binding mandate would be good for the UAE, but it has to be supported with other policy supporting mechanisms.
Thank you, Robert. So you brought up something is that currently there is a voluntary 1% SAF mandate in the UAE. And Yusuf, I would like to ask you this question because there is a voluntary mandate, but is there actual demand for SAF? Do you see airlines or fuel producers willingly adopting SAF currently?
And I will start really, from the, let's say, the beginning of the biofuel journey in the UAE. I mean, when we started back in 2010, there was no mandate, there was no voluntary even mandate, there was no, even corporate social responsibility about saving the environment. It was not a hype, it was not a big thing. But companies, customers in the UAE, some of them, they are more conscious about the environment. Some, they have the knowledge about, the recycling of the product, the waste to energy, and, they know the benefits of it, So those special customers, they were more into the biofuels. So I will tell you, for the sustainable aviation fuel, it is the same thing. We saw, Dubai and the UAE, the airports, it's not driven by only our national airlines, but there are airlines from, name it, from all around the world. There is also the DHL, the Europeans, the Americans, right? So those customers, they are more conscious. Even the private jets, who fly, who charter the private jets, and name it, so many, knowledgeable about the sustainable aviation fuel. And the thing is, they would do it, for the carbon credits. They would do it for their, the reports for their carbon social, corporate social responsibility, and many other things. So I see the UAE, right now, to answer your question, it's gonna start like that. There has to be some fixing of the numbers, even the supply. I see the best solution for UAE right now, for sustainable aviation fuel, is to have the actual material for the customers, right? Right now, when airlines or even private jets or any other aircraft, they would ask for sustainable aviation fuel, it would be hard for them to get it immediately. So they will have to ask it, for a long time, until they bring it. And there is other challenge, which is the regulations and many other things. I believe, even right now, after the air show, after UAE had the COP28, and they're pioneer in the in the region, maybe the world also, about the carbon footprint and so to care more about the environment. There will be some systems, to establish, and to put up the sustainable aviation fuel over here, for the customers. So I think it's gonna start gradually. And I like when Mr. Robert said, there's a voluntary. So there's also other target for 2030, and there's other target for the long run. And I will tell you, these targets can be adjusted for the actual performance, the actual supply of the sustainable aviation fuel. Also, the technology wise, so it plays on a different factors. But the thing is, there has to be some saving the environment for the fueling of the aircrafts. I will tell you, UAE, they did not do, back in time, about the biofuel mandate. But I would say that beginning of 2026, there was a mandate of the biofuels. So this is something, has been written. And in 2029, there will be a fully mandatory in the biofuels for all the stations in the UAE. So, when you see something like that, that, there will be something also for the sustainable aviation fuel. Our leadership, they will have to take it, slowly, to see how it goes to the market, and many other factors. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. I think the gist of what you're saying is, it's not about waiting for a mandate before taking action. It's really about showing the proof of concept. You're just showing that it works, showing that it can be done in the UAE, and then after that, like you mentioned, right? You did biofuels more than a decade ago now, and now you have a mandate for biofuels. So, but and this is where I would like to turn to you, Alejandro, because biofuels, road transportation fuel, is very commercial. The same thing can be said for SAF as well. I mean, producing SAF from waste oil, from vegetable oil, the technology is very commercial. The challenge, not just in the UAE, but around the world, is that there is not enough waste oil feedstock, especially to support the SAF mandates around the world. And that's a major reason why many people predict that the EU and the UK SAF mandate will not succeed, at least in the near term. From your experience, because you have been working in technology for fuels in the UAE, what do you think? What are your thoughts about this? Do you think that the UAE should also focus on the HEFA-based fuel in the near term and then deploy other technologies? Or is there potential for the UAE to do something very unique and use a different technology than what the EU, the UK, and the rest of the world is relying on?
Thank you, Renil. I mean, it's a very interesting question, of course. The UAE is a place where, unfortunately, there is no fresh water, there's no arable land, and so producing biomass is very, very hard. Producing biomass at scale. Yes, we do have waste streams. We have used cooking oil, as Yusuf was saying. We do have municipal solid waste, so that opens the door for other types of projects. But in the end, even if we use at full capacity all of the used cooking oil and all of the waste that exists, which, by the way, already has alternate markets, and so we don't have access to all of the municipal solid waste that already exists in the UAE. A lot of it is already going to produce, for example, energy. Some of it is being diverted to produce other types of energy vectors. And so the availability of municipal solid waste for SAF is actually very limited. And so that, puts us at a point where, as the UAE SAF mandate says, sorry, not the SAF mandate, sorry, the SAF roadmap says, we have a short-term goal or a mid-term goal to 2030 of producing 700 million liters per year in 2030. But then the long-term goal, which the global aviation industry has set, is to reach net zero by year 2050. And what that means for the UAE is that we will need to produce anywhere between 10 and 12 billion liters of SAF by year 2050 in the UAE. And so this is we're producing zero right now, and we're going to have to go to 700, or if you want to go by the 1% mandate or voluntary mandate, that is anywhere between 100 and 200 million liters by year 2031. And so, those seem as if those are reachable goals, right? With potentially projects that are in the pipeline. But the real challenge is going to come by year 2050 when we need to produce 10 to 12 billion liters. And so the question becomes, what technology platform should we use? And of course, the UAE is a global energy leader. The UAE has already set a very ambitious target for producing low carbon intensity hydrogen. And so a few years back, there was a report that was published by the World Economic Forum, which focused in the UAE, which was essentially the PTL roadmap for the UAE, or the power to liquids roadmap for the UAE. The UAE has been able to achieve the lowest cost per kilowatt hour of energy in terms of solar energy, for example, and so globally. And so it has certain, I would call advantages that would allow it to go after the production of SAF via the PTL pathway, which is not one pathway, right? You use low carbon intensity hydrogen, you use a carbon capture technology, you combine these gases into a syngas or a synthetic gas, and then from that, you have a choice of routes so that you're able to produce a liquid hydrocarbon fuel. And so there are still many open questions as to what is the optimum route. Maybe there are several, and maybe the UAE will be able to produce PTL via all of those pathways. Currently, the idea is to start producing low carbon aviation fuel, LCAF, as soon as possible, as soon as the certification is actually approved globally by the International Civil Aviation Organization. And then I would say that the next or the other pathway that is available now is co-producing. So take what is available, for example, use cooking oil, and co-process it in the same installation that is already there, which ADNOC has already been working on. The Abu Dhabi National Oil Company has already been working on trials to produce SAF via this pathway. So let's get the low-hanging fruit first. Let's work so that we are able to produce LCAF at scale. Let's work so that we're able to co-produce at scale. And at the same time, let's continue working so that we're able to produce via power to liquids additional resources, which will come online at a later time.
No, thank you very much, Andrew. So essentially, it's really about finding the path of least resistance. Like you said, start with the low-hanging fruits, LCAF, co-processing, and then moving on to the greenfield SAF facilities. And so there's a couple of questions that came in from the audience, and I would like to start addressing them directly since it's related to the discussion. And ultimately, it comes down to policy. Whether you're doing LCAF or co-processing and so on, it does come down to policy. And Robert, you alluded to that earlier when you said that you don't believe that a mandate alone, a legally binding mandate alone, is enough to build up the SAF industry in the UAE. When you look at the different policy instrument available, I'm not asking you to create a policy framework for the UAE, but what do you think would be the ideal set of policies that would really support the build out of the SAF industry in the region?
Well, that's really a big question. Lots of different policies that can be designed, but I think we need to back up a little bit in kind of identifying how we do this. And the previous two speakers have alluded to this a little bit. I mean, Yusuf has pointed out that, even without policy, there is investment and there is, production or collection and different trials going on. So it's not as if, policy has to come completely to a dry desert market where nothing's happening. There are things happening, very encouraging things. And I think that's very important for policymakers to see, because what we have at the moment, slightly different than in the EU, what we have in the EU is, a lot of policymakers, actors, aviation producers came together, agreed, governments mostly, of course, agreed a very detailed policy framework around the binding mandate, but didn't really support that with a number of other instruments such as, fiscal incentives. So it was much more of a stick approach, I would argue. But they did come together and discuss this for a number of years. I think in the UAE at the moment, there's a need for all of the different actors in the ecosystem to come together with government and start having these discussions and identify them. So rather than me, and we don't have the time anyway, but rather than me identifying a full list of policies that I think the UAE could develop, it's much more important for the real investors, the people with skin in the game, ADNOC, ENAC, Emirat, Yusuf's company, the government, the ministries, to start identifying what sort of policies the UAE wants. Because when you look at the roadmap, it's really a fantastic document. But it now needs to go to the next stage and be prioritized for action. And the action should be public policy. However, governments don't like to just pass public policy. And I think the extremely efficient, technocratic, expert approach that the UAE takes would not actually take an approach that just passes policy without thinking it through carefully. Governments need to see that is willingness and investment and activity and production. I mean, recently we've seen the SAF-1 project being announced, a $30 million investment. Okay, that's great because it shows willingness. Then governments can step in and start identifying public policy measures to support what's happening. It's a little bit like just putting water on the seeds. But if there are no seeds there, there's no point in public policy. But trying to get to your question a little bit in detail, I think a binding mandate could possibly be a very good idea for the UAE because it can spur the market. See it as kind of kickstarting the motor. An engine which is not fully on yet needs a bit of ignition, and a binding mandate could do that. But a binding mandate on its own is not enough. We have to discover what the tax incentives for investments are, what the import and export duties are with regard to feedstocks, because this is really problem number one. And it's been referred to there by Alejandro. Security of supply of quality feedstock. Then we also have the technology neutrality, mix of technologies approach. Until all of those questions are sorted out and discussed this year, I would argue, then we can get to starting identifying the public policy list of frameworks or instruments in a framework that should be developed, designed. And once they're designed, they of course need to be implemented consistently, and there should not be any sudden U-turns. Investors need the policy, but government need to see the start of investment.
No, thank you very much, Robert. And Alejandro, Yusuf, if you have anything to add on this as well, please do. But Yusuf, I will turn to you on this. Yep, go ahead, Alejandro.
No, just to complement what Robert was saying, there is a SAF UA policy in place already. Okay, so we do have a policy. The policy is a very general policy. It does suggest to investigate, if you will, or to take into consideration, 5 different incentives that are listed there. But clearly, that is not enough. And so we do need to go after, the World Economic Forum through the Clean Skies for Tomorrow coalition has issued a document reviewing the types of policies that can be considered from the supply side, from the demand side, from enabling the market side. The ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, has also provided a set of guidelines and a set of best practices, if you will. They also do look at the supply side, the demand side, and enabling the market. And IATA, the International Air Transport Association, has also come out with a set of best practices for considering policy development. And so the UAE needs to take these guidelines and try to make a bespoke suit. Try to make a set of policies that, through time, because policies can help, but they need to be reviewed and potentially modified as the market develops, right? And so potentially the mandate now is not the right policy. The policy of a mandate may come at a later time when the market is better ready to actually use a mandate in the best way in the best way possible. And so this is what I'm talking about. We need to make a policy suit that fits the UAE as best as it can. And there are many examples out there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alejandro. And Yusuf, I'd like to turn to you for this one, because we can talk about policy at a high level and discuss the different policies that can help spur the adoption of SAF. But as someone who has actually built a biofuel facility in the UAE, are there any That's a question that also came in from the audience. Are there any specific, I would say, very local restrictions or roadblocks around building a SAF facility in the UAE? Not talking about the policy, the SAF mandates and so on, but rather when you have to build something locally in the UAE. If you had to build a SAF facility today, what is really preventing you from doing that today? Is it just the lack of demand from the customer, or are there any other roadblocks in the way?
First of all, Ronil, I would like to somehow agree with Alejandro. Is not to put a policy, a mandate policy, and this is a smart thing from our leadership and our government that, once we are ready, then there will be a mandate, of course, right? So, it's when you ask me about the sustainable aviation fuel, in the UAE, we have did a feasibility study, and in this feasibility study, it showed, the feedstock source and the technology wise and the production and all of that. So we realized that, building a sustainable aviation fuel, it is more advanced, more complicated and complex, and also financing wise, it is higher, much higher than building just a normal biofuel plant. Big difference. But we realized that before, and we have put this also in our articles, in our company news and everything. First, before anything, is we need to import the sustainable aviation fuel, test it here in the market, right? Create the business, create the demand. If there is no demand right now, no, we will have to create it, right? And the opportunity that what I was talking about first, that there is, companies who are more conscious about the environment. They have a target, to put up, in their carbon footprint report, yearly one, that, we need to reduce the carbon footprint. So those customers, they will be the first customers, to adapt the sustainable aviation fuel, because they know it, because they tried it in Europe, because they tried it in United States, or China even, right? So those customers who will be creating the market at the beginning, and after that, after supplying the customers, see the regulations with our government, with our national oil companies, right? Partnering with them, to see the supply. See, I'll tell you, supplying this the jet fuel is not like supplying normal diesel to ships. It's not supplying like normal gasoline, petrol, for cars. No, has to be more regulated, more advanced, in many terms, right? Even the sustainable aviation fuel that will be imported has to be on the regulations of the UAE. So there are like so many steps to bring, the sustainable aviation fuel, launch it here in the market, our market in the UAE, blending it with the normal jet fuel, and then, supplying it to the customer, name it many things, private jets or commercial airline or whatever. So those steps has to be, somehow, to speed up, even reducing the cost of the, product. So this is our target. After, putting up, creating the market in the UAE, then we will see if it is good option, to have a sustainable aviation fuel plant in the UAE, or maybe to postpone it other time. I am very much aligned with the LCAF. LCAF, it has to be there. LCAF, I can see it is like the 10 ppm diesel, here. Back before 2014, 2015, the diesel in the UAE, it was a 500 ppm. But what had our national oil company, they have flooded the market with the 10 ppm, the ultra low sulfur diesel. So I believe LCAF will be together, hand in hand with the sustainable aviation fuel from using oil, to put it up in the market. And I believe it might not be 1% at the beginning. It will be less than that, to see gradually how the business companies, the airlines or the private jets, to test the product commercially. I'm not talking about technically. Technically, it will be already done, of course, before even taking it to the aircraft. But commercially, will it affect the price of the tickets? long term, short term, how the financing of it, what is the benefit of it. So many points that has to be discussed. But after all, when you look at the UAE, we are pioneer in many things. We are proud that we have the tallest tower in the world. We are proud that we have did so many pioneering things, and I believe that we will be also pioneer to have to launch the sustainable aviation fuel in the market, and to be the first to be in the region to put up something like that. So yeah.
There's something that I would like to dwell on. And Robert, you go ahead first. I see you raise your hand.
Just very briefly, because I think there's a lot of agreement here, and I
Yeah.
really liked Alejandro's point around a bespoke tailored suit, because of course we do have a policy, but what I'm saying is that the policy needs to go to the next detailed level. In terms of, Alejandro called it a bespoke suit. I say dotting the I's, crossing the T's, moving forward now, because the general policy and the SAF's roadmap are both very good, inspiring documents. You think, wow, there's an incredible vision here. There's really a roadmap to do things. My point, obviously, is that we need to move to that next stage on the basis of that policy. And I just wanted to raise my hand because I fear there's a risk at the moment that everybody's looking a little bit, perhaps too much at the EU market, which, in all honesty, is failing. It's not succeeding, if I'm being kinder. And if the EU market doesn't succeed, I fear that there will be reluctance from policymakers elsewhere, like the UAE, to say, okay, this SAFs thing, we're not doing this. I would really say that is not the lesson to take from the EU. The lesson to take is that the UAE is a pretty unique place that can develop its own tailor-made bespoke suit. But don't spend too much time watching and trying to learn from the EU. And next thing you know, it's 2027 and the 2030, 2031 deadline's already on us. The time is to move forward with more detailed policy actions.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree there, Robert. And and something I want to ask, and something that Yusuf brought up as well, and I would like to hear from you, Alejandro and Robert. The question is on imports. I think Yusuf, you're sharing your screen. There you go. One other thing I wanted to ask is the question of imports. The assumption around all discussions on SAF policies and so on is that we want to support the build out of local production facilities, when you talk about SAF across the world. What about the role of imports? Like, do you see importing SAF as a feasible option to really kickstart the market, or do you see import of SAF as a major contributor to the adoption of SAF in the UAE?
Do you want me to go ahead, or
Yes. Yep,
Yusuf?
go ahead, Robert. Yes.
Given what's already been said about, the lack of a UAE feedstock on its own to meet the volumes, then imports obviously have to be looked at. If you look, as far as I know now, there's a 4 to 5% duty on exports of UCO outside of the UAE, which says to me the government wants to keep the UCO in the UAE. And one of the reasons they want to do that is to support the burgeoning biofuels market being led by companies like Yusuf's Luta Biofuels and others who'll come into the market. The question then arises, well, imports from where? So it's important to bear in mind that three of the largest countries, if not the largest, for exporting UCO are China, Malaysia, and Indonesia. You have then issues with regard to getting rid of import duties. So, for example, if you're imposing import duties on those imports of UCO, then you're not going to get your import very easily because those exporting countries may go to other markets. But then attached to the imports question are issues around the quality of the feedstock, the ability for that feedstock to be treated. But thirdly, very importantly, what's happening in particularly China, I think, is that some of these UCO exporting countries are now looking to build their own SAFs ecosystem value chain pipeline. So they're going to be reluctant to export unless you make it very, very easy for them to export. So the importing aspect is really crucial, but is conditioned and bounded by two or three other factors that we may not be in complete control of. So I think we have to factor that in to the discussion. And I think we have to therefore, from a government policy standpoint, try and make it as easy as possible for the highest quality, lowest dutied import of UCO, for example, to come in. But it's not only UCO and it's not only that feedstock. I think we're talking about technology neutrality. There are other feedstocks that should be supported there as well. I would guess, and Alejandro's better placed than me to know this, but only relying on UCO and HEFA pathways is not the right way to go. But the lowest hanging fruit aspect is important. That is the cheapest and most feasible in some respects. But the question of import is absolutely crucial for the UAE because it's not readily available in the UAE in the size that's required for the volumes being aimed for.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Robert. I do agree that relying solely on imports is risky, right? Because you're essentially giving the control of your feedstock supply to another country. And we've seen, in other areas, not SAF, but in other areas, especially here in Europe, what happens when access to fuel, to energy is suddenly cut off. Alejandro, I would like to ask you a question about technology related to what Robert brought up, because a lot of the question on the audience is really around feedstock supply or the lack of feedstock when it comes to waste oil. So I won't be asking these questions individually, but rather collectively. Everyone agrees that we don't have enough waste oil feedstock, and you alluded to that earlier when you came up with the hierarchy of how to build out the technology value chain in the UAE. But you've also done R&D in this space in the past, and I would like to ask you about new technologies, new pathways. The technologies that we have today, HEFA based on UCO, alcohol to jet in the future, e-fuels and so on. The challenge is that they're all very expensive. Estimates vary, but people say it's 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more expensive, at least here in Europe. In the UAE, do you expect to see similar price gaps between the different technologies, or do you think that there's another technology out there, even at a lab scale, even early stage, that can overcome that price gap and would be fit for the UAE and the broader MENA region?
Well, the short answer to your
Not
question
an easy
is
question. Yeah.
no, but the short answer to your question is no, right? What needs to happen is the price for producing a liter of SAF via any of the pathways is currently significantly above the price of producing a liter of traditional jet fuel. Why? Because the UAE has very access to a lot of oil, right? A lot of oil that is actually in the right conditions so that it can be turned easily into jet fuel. And so it's, I'm going to, venture to say that it's less expensive to produce jet fuel here than in other countries, right? And so it is a very big question. Where should the UAE go in this respect, right? It may very well be that the UAE is best positioned to continue producing, in this particular case, LCAF, right? Because a lot of investments have already been made to decarbonize the oil and gas operations. And so produce LCAF to the max and continue working. You mentioned R&D, right? You continue working in the R&D space, but unfortunately, in my view, I worked in developing for the last 12 years. I worked in developing a sustainable feedstock for the HEFA pathway, right? We established a platform called the Seawater Energy and Agriculture System, where we took seawater and we were growing plants using wastewater from an aquaculture farm, and we actually did a flight, a proof of concept flight back in 2019 that flew from Abu Dhabi to Amsterdam on a Boeing 787 with GE engines at Etihad Airways, all of the partners in the consortium that were participating. And we produced SAF in the UAE, SAF based on a halophytic biomass.
Mhm.
When we tried to scale this halophytic biomass to the next phase, to the demonstration phase, we couldn't find enough investors, right? Because it's such a complex set of variables that are at play. And the problem with this is that it's an agricultural technology that to see a return on it, it will take anywhere between 10, 15, or 20 years. So nobody is willing to bet on that. One of the questions in the stroll pointed out the idea of algae, macroalgae, microalgae, very good options, right? But they also have their issues. The technologies to do this at scale are simply not there. And the cost of producing SAF via either micro or macro algae. For example, in Mexico, we have a huge issue with sargassum. Sargassum is a macroalgae that is coming into the Mexican Caribbean coast and is creating all kinds of havoc. Well, the Association of Hoteliers in the Riviera Maya have gotten together and they're trying to tackle this problem. And so there are technology solutions out there, but they're also expensive because macroalgae coming from the sea has a very high salt content. And so there are many issues around this. And so we need to continue working on R&D. The UAE has certain advantages that it must take into account, such as the ability to produce solar energy at a very low cost. And so we need to continue working on the power to liquids pathway because that's really the solution that is going to be able to bring about the quantities that are required to support the aviation industry here in the UAE.
Great, thank you very much. I do really echo that point around R&D because Lux Research, we do work in emerging technologies, and there are many startups out there across the world in Americas, Europe, and the Middle East that are really developing these really novel platforms for SAF production, currently at an early stage at the pilot scale, but these are really the technologies that will be needed if we truly want to have a SAF that is close to cost parity with fossil jet fuel. All right, so there's around 10 minutes left in this panel presentation. So for the audience, if you have any questions that you still want to ask, now's the time to do so. So please type in the questions. While you do that, I would like to ask each of the panelists one thing, and this is usually how I like to conclude these panels. But we talked a lot around the challenges and the opportunities for SAF. We talked a lot around the different mechanisms, the different opportunities that are available for the UAE in the SAF space. But if you had the ability to just change one thing today, one thing in the SAF ecosystem, and I'm not talking about how you would do so, I'm really talking about the one thing that you would like to change, whether it's more policy, more investment, better policy, and so on. What would be that one thing and why? And let's start with you, Yusuf. You're the first on my screen.
I think investments. Investments. Why? Because it will go through the 5 or 10 steps. To establish the market of the sustainable aviation fuel. When I look at the UAE, I see it has the biggest opportunity in the airline business. We're building the biggest airport in the world. So many airlines are coming here. Emirates, like one of the biggest airlines in the world, and it's going to be hub for aviation. UAE considers half of the world. So we're like in the middle of the world. When I look about Dubai, it started, in Dubai, we don't have raw material of aluminium, but because of the great location of the UAE, we will be able to import the raw material for aluminium, produce the aluminium, and then send it to the world. So I look at the sustainable aviation fuel somehow like this. Even we don't have the used cooking oil, we don't have the raw material, but the biggest opportunity is the international, airline, or it's like a hub for aviation is being established in the UAE. It's already somehow there, but you look at the future, how it's going to be in 10, 15 years, or maybe 3 decades from now, So when you see something like that, you believe that, okay, there will be a sustainable aviation fuel market, and how the world is being changed, There will be somehow new technologies that, will advance the project, the roadmap, the milestone for such a, uh, product. I compared the sustainable aviation fuel, the alcohol to jet, and HEFA and all the other stuff. So what will work, it's like a steps. You cannot reach the second or third floor by just like that. You have to go on the steps, right? So I believe what's happening in the UAE right now, the steps has being built, right? First import. Before that, there have to be some regulations, to approve the product. It starts less than 1%. Even not even, it will start as an optional, but has to be there for the customers who would love to pay more for such a premium product. But in this term, they will get a certificate of reducing of carbon footprint and many other things. So these steps has to be built to reach a target where there will be a mandate for sustainable aviation fuel. So together, of course, with the LCAF, together with the fuels will reduce the carbon footprint. So I believe something like that is being built up, and it's gonna happen.
All right, thank you. All right, so Youssef, your answer was more investment. Alejandro, I'll turn to you next. What will be your answer to that question?
I would say that we need to continue working on reducing the risk, right? The price differential is nothing else but a reflection of the risk that investors perceive when investing in one of these technology pathways, or in a particular project that is going to take a particular technology to produce SAF, right? There was a recent announcement. Mazda is, together with Tadweer, are looking to work on a waste to energy or waste to SAF project, right? But there's still things that need to work out before a final investment decision. Maybe it's already been done, but not in the announcement that was made. But without the proper set of I guess, frameworks that will allow for the reduction of the risk, right? For allowing this price parity to somehow come to fruition, it's going to be very hard to get any projects underway. And so there are examples here in the UAE. The solar energy example is the best example we can use. When I first came into the UAE 13 years ago, the solar facility in Masdar City had just been built, and they built it knowing that it was going to be more expensive to produce energy that way. But today, the UAE produces the lowest cost of solar energy in the world. How did that happen? Well, there were a number of decisions that were made. Very wise leadership in the UAE took some decisions and said, look, we're going to support this technology because we believe in it, and we're going to make sure that there are guarantees so that projects using this technology can be developed. So something similar, and this is why I was talking about a bespoke suit, right? Something similar needs to happen here so that the SAF ecosystem starts developing. The only other thing I would say is, and it's related to one of the questions that was in the question panel, is that the UAE has made a very clear announcement in terms of investing in low carbon intensity hydrogen, right? And so all I can say is that's great. And yes, we do need hydrogen to produce SAF, right? But let's not forget about aviation fuel, right? Within that overall strategy to produce low carbon intensity hydrogen, let's make sure that aviation has the hand raised and that it is not forgotten in the layer below, because Right now, everyone's working to produce low carbon intensity hydrogen, and then whatever comes afterwards. Let's not do that. Let's continue working on low carbon intensity hydrogen, but make sure that aviation is up here because aviation is so important to the economy of the UAE.
Great, thank you very much, Alejandro. Robert, you're next and the last one. If you could change
Yeah,
one thing in the SAF ecosystem, what would it be?
I think what we're missing at the moment is coordination. We're missing an ecosystem. We see wonderful examples of dialogue, of bilateral agreements, of initiatives from the bottom up. We see from the top down, a positive general policy, a positive SAF's roadmap. But we need to bring this together now, in my view. We need an ecosystem. We need all of the different investors, technology providers across different pathways, across different technologies to be able to start having a clear multi dialogue with government, with policymakers in setting out the next roadmap. So we have a SAFs roadmap. Now we really need to work on a policy roadmap. And I think what we're missing in order to do that, my fear is that everything's a little bit too disparate at the moment. You hear about this 30 million investment with SAF one, you hear about ADNOC, you hear about corridors, you hear about different things. We need to bring this together in some form of ecosystem. For example, a SAFs Producers Association or a SAFs Association where government can go to the different pathways of SAFs, speak, start getting expert input and opinion to design this bespoke policy suite. Alejandro, I'm stealing your wonderful term there, but we really need to get that identified. So I think what we're missing is an actual functioning ecosystem and coordination, bringing all of the parties together in some form of association with government to start going through the work. That's what's missing at the moment. And I think 2025, 2026 rather, is crucial for getting this multi-log going in order to design the next stage. So coordination ecosystem is what's missing. And one thing we could address that with would be, for example, a SAFs association working with government to identify all of this.
Great, thank you very much, Robert. So for those of you in the audience, you've heard what is needed in order to really accelerate development of SAF in the UAE. And there's a few more questions here, but unfortunately we have run out of time. But the good news is that the panelists will all be at the SAF Congress in Dubai in 2 weeks' time, I believe. So if there's any more questions that you have for them, please do so in person. Please make sure that you attend the SAF Congress. It really is a fantastic event.